Welcome viewers and learners of the MEV 002 Environmental and Occupational Hazards course. I introduce myself as Dr. Sushmitha Baskar from the discipline of Environmental Studies, School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies, Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. Now let us discuss the mitigation of natural hazards and disasters. All along you have been learning and understanding the various type of natural hazards. We also discussed some of the technological hazards that have occurred in the past and how humans have lost their lives, property, and the entire environment and the ecosystem also has been destroyed and degraded to a certain extent. Now let us understand how these can be mitigated by the use of certain control techniques, how the public could be made aware, the role of individuals in the management of the same, and the use of technology in the management of these disasters. Let us now see the learning modules of this course. So after reading and listening to this module, you should be able to discuss the management of natural hazards and disasters, identify the measures to be taken before a disaster, during a disaster, and the post-disaster measures that have to be taken. You should also be able to describe the role of individuals in the management of natural hazards as well as disasters. Finally, we will also be explaining the technology assistance and technological initiatives that are possible for the disaster management problems. Giving an introduction, a natural disaster is an extreme adverse impact event resulting from natural processes of the earth. Some of the examples that we have discussed include the floods, the hurricanes, tornadoes, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunami, and various other geological processes. Now, we also understand that a natural disaster can cause loss to life and property, and every year globally, the world faces numerous natural disasters which have a great impact on the human existence. An adverse event will not rise to the level of a disaster if it occurs in an area without the vulnerable elements. Now, in a vulnerable area, for example, such as Nepal during the 2015 earthquake, this can have disastrous consequence and it can leave even permanent change on the landscape, on the area, and that requires many years to recover from the disaster. Disaster management. So this is the creation of plans through which the communities are able to reduce the vulnerability to hazards and cope with disasters. We will discuss the concepts of hazard assessment, preparedness of people at the time of any disaster, and the challenges occurring during those times. Hazard assessment. So every year the whole world faces a huge challenge with hazards and their adverse effects in the form of disasters. A large amount of loss to life and property are calculated each year. How do we define hazard assessment? This involves the process of studying the nature of the hazards, determining its essential features, that is based on the degree of the severity, the duration, the extent, and the impact of the hazard. So that's why we see the spatial distribution and extent and the impact that has caused on that area and their relationship. So that is how we are able to describe and define hazard assessment. The hazard assessment should begin with the identification of what the natural hazards can be expected and how they may change in the short and the medium term as a result of the climate change. Now, first of all, in an area or in a region, all the potential hazards are identified. After that, we could see the areas that could be affected by the hazards and mark them. This is also called as hazard mapping. Then the magnitude, the intensity, and the frequency of the hazards, these are determined and the causes of the hazards will be investigated. Now, the hazards could include earthquakes, volcanic eruption, flood, drought, cyclones, and epidemics. So for each of this, the magnitude, the intensity, the frequency, all this may be different. They need to be determined, and with the help of the hazard mapping and so on, the hazards can be investigated. So what are the steps in hazard assessment? First, we need to identify the type of hazard. That is the very first primary thing that has to be done. The first stage in hazard analysis is to identify the type of hazards. Then, depending on the hazards identified, the process needs to be continued on a separate basis for each type of hazard or a group of hazards. Now, for example, earthquake. This may require different instruments for analysis when compared to landslides or floods, and even the specialization also may be different. So, you need different techniques. In the same way, there are many ways to classify the hazard types. For example, natural events, they occur suddenly without giving you any notice, or they can even occur gradually of an atmospheric, it can be of an atmospheric, of a seismic, of geological, volcanic, biological and also hydrological in nature. While the others may include the mass movements under, they can also be classified as the geomorphological hazards. The frequency. So, this investigation aims at finding the seasonality of occurrence. Now, mainly how frequent this occurs, in which season this can occur, and that depends, for example, the monsoon and the rainfall. So, by understanding the frequency and the seasonal predictions, then we can understand and investigate these type of hazards. Risk and the coverage. This is also a very important factor. After we identify and characterize the hazard prone locations, after this is undertaken, then identification and determination of the probabilities of occurrence of an ordinal scale. So, whether it is high, medium or it is going to be a low impact one, all this will be completed. The magnitude. The next step is to estimate or calculate the scale, the strength, that is the magnitude of the hazardous event, also on an ordinal scale. Then we need to identify the causes of the hazards. So, the next step, we will estimate or calculate the scale, the strength or the magnitude of the event, also on an ordinal scale. Likelihood of new hazards that are emerging. Now, there could be natural factors. Now, in the causes, there could be certain natural factors. There could be changes in the pattern of the weather that can lead to new hazards like the drought, frequent and extreme floods. Then there could be fluctuations like in the economic reasons. For example, there could be fluctuations in the value of currency that can affect the livelihoods and the trade related policy changes, the loss of raw material, goods, industrial damages and destruction. Then there could be changes in the social and political trends. So, there could be changes in policies, in the relocation of people, there could also be certain conflicts. So, all these also can be certain causes for the emergence of the hazards. Then industrial hazards. Now, this also is sudden, it does not give you a certain warning. Only in the certain cases of gas leak and slowly when something is getting leaked into the environment, then we can sense the smell and try to do some interventions. But then in certain cases like the nuclear explosions or in tsunami triggered nuclear explosions. So, all this then that is sudden, it gives it no warning. So, the industrial hazards, chemical accidents, poisoning, these are also the causes which need to be investigated. Then there are also new forms of epidemics and diseases. Now, we have seen in the past, there has been cases of the swine flu, there have been cases of the bird flu, then AIDS, we have hepatitis B, A, B and C. Then we have the Ebola virus. So, all this could be seasonal, it could be due to the global climate change, due to the monsoon, rainfall variations and patterns and fluctuations, and it could also be due to the natural hazards and the secondary and the tertiary effects that are emerging from the same. And presently the world is facing the coronavirus, the COVID-19, which is also a new form of an epidemic and a pandemic that has affected and brought the whole world to a standstill. So, these are the, we need to identify the likelihood of the new hazards that are emerging. The next step is prediction and warning. So, sufficient warning needs to be given to people if you need to save lives. Sound scientific predictions and warnings, they save life. With only a few minutes notice of a tornado or a flash flood, people can act. They can run to safer places. For example, those who are on the shoreline, the fishermen, they can come out from their boats and they can run to the safer locations, and they can protect themselves from injury and also death. Predictions and warning also reduce the damage and the economic losses. So, if the notice to a disaster, it is given well in time, well in advance, in certain cases of the riverine floods or in wildfires or hurricanes, then the property, natural resources and the lives of people and the livestock can be protected. Some examples, if we have to give certain illustrations, the Hurricane Hugo. This illustrated the benefits of an effective natural hazards warning system. So here actually this was successfully done, and the warning was given well in time for the people. So without the successful prediction, warning and evacuation, the loss of life in this specific hurricane, it could have reached thousands, but actually the death numbers were less. They were just numbered. Why? Because there was successful warning and predictions that were given to the area and to the people, to the communities. In contrast, when a hurricane struck Galveston, that was in Texas, this had no warning system, and it occurred on September 8th in the 1900s. 6,000 people were killed and 5,000 were injured. So you see, when a warning is given, there is some kind of a prediction, evacuation is possible, but when it strikes and there is no warning system, then people run helter-skelter, and in that case it becomes difficult to control the same. So from this we understand that preparedness is very important. So disaster preparedness can prevent a bad situation from becoming worse. Emergencies come in various forms, and they having, for example, if we stock ourselves, okay, even if I have to give a recent example, during the initial times of this corona pandemic, people were asked to stockpile things of the essential commodities, because they feared that they will not get the grocery items, they will not get a sufficient ration or the food items for their survival. So if you have the right checklist and supplies and kit, including the first aid kit, if you have all these things with you, that means you are prepared for the same, prepared for in the event of a disaster. In the same way, you also need to have certain evacuation plans. If you are in a community or in a flat, you should know the steps that you need to take, that you should not take the lift in such cases if there is a fire in the building. So you need to take the steps, and which is the nearest possibility where you can come out of the building and stand in the open, even in case of earthquakes. So all this makes your family safe. Planning also helps everyone understand what to do when a disaster strikes. In some instances, it may be several days before the vital services can be restored. Now, it's not only the natural hazards and disasters that can create problem. In certain cases, extreme cold, when it goes minus 35 or even minus, less than minus 35 degrees, this especially occurs in the Scandinavian countries or higher up in the Arctics. In that case, if, the electrical lines sometimes could get frozen. So there may be days that people do not have the electric supplies. In that case, when the vital services can be restored only after a sufficient period of time, maybe a week, surviving this period also may become extremely difficult. So disaster preparedness is the first step in the management of natural hazards and disasters. Preparedness. It also reduces the feelings and helps the communities and families to know where to take refuge, and that brings the community together. And they are well prepared to face the same. They also know how to care for each other and also how to care for the basic medical issues. Then it can also alleviate some of the devastation by reducing the impacts of disasters. Now let us take each of the cases one by one and let us discuss them as a pre-disaster, during the disaster, and also the post-disaster management techniques. Now in the case of earthquake, a pre-disaster phase, make sure that your your houses are earthquake resistant, the material that it is made up of, and in which area you are located in. Are you situated in a hilly terrain or in the plains, and so on. Secure that the heavy furniture and the object are actually towards the wall and that they don't fall, they are not placed in between where that can fall on you. Then you choose a couple of family meetings in one place where each and all of you are able to understand the evacuation plans and identify the possible places where you can reach or stand in the open in the event the earthquake strikes. Then also you need to be self-sufficient, that you need to stockpile your things for at least 3 days before which the national or the local governments come to help with the same. So always for the management there are 3 stages: the pre-disaster, during, and of course the post-disaster management. Pre, that means before a disaster occurs, proper planning and preparedness is required to reduce the potential loss of lives and environmental loss due to the nature of the hazard. So, in this case, like fishermen, they can be given good warning in the case of cyclones, tsunamis and floods. And then of course, we can stockpile even the medical items and the medicines so that we can prepare ourselves for the same. During the disaster, now this is very important because here the people affected should be properly cared for until the disaster management team comes to help the community and the people. They will actually set up the control rooms, they will issue the warning notification, they have the action for evacuation, they need to transport the people to safer areas. Then they have the special shift arrangement of making these wards and the isolation units. They provide medical care for all those people who are affected there. So, the doctors, nurses and everybody, they all come to help the people out there. Then the other needs also include financial assistance, okay, because many of them will not be insured against these things. So, finance is a basic thing because people lose everything just in one hazard or a disaster. Temporary shelters are required. Clearing of the debris, suppose some people and some things are actually caught up right below, so you need to clear the debris. So, the roles of multiple people and agencies are required in order to manage these disasters. Post-disaster. Post-disaster is after the thing has been managed well during the disaster, after everything is done, recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction. These are three important things that need to be addressed. So, you need to recover from the disaster, rehabilitation so that people are rehabilitated in shelters, in safer places and we can assist them with long-term recovery. They may have certain psycho-traumatic issues, so we need to make them recover from the same. Then reconstruction. So, the communities where they reconstruct their entire community, for example, schools, the grocery stores or their houses, the infrastructure, the medical facilities, all these they need to be reconstructed. So, again this requires both the national as well as the community support. Earthquake. So, we discussed the pre-disaster phase. Now, in the disaster phase, in most of even the schools in Japan, if you see, the children are taught to duck, cover and hold. So, they know how to duck under the desk. So, this is also the pre-disaster will also include training of certain kinds. Okay, the children and the people need to be trained as to what to do when disaster strikes. Now, here during the disaster, duck, cover and hold is very important. So, that you hold firmly to under a furniture, under a desk for example, then move normally of course you should move outside in the open, that is always better, or you can also sit with your back to the wall and bring your knees to your chest and then you cover your head. Then you need to stay away from the mirrors and the windows because that can crash and then that can fall. When it is actually the building is vibrating, when it is shaking, then at that time you should not leave the building but secure yourself in a safe place. And if you are outdoors, then you need to move away from the bigger structures like big trees or buildings and bridges or overhead power lines, because all these can then fall on us and it can create havoc. Post disaster. Here again you need to check for the unstable objects and you need to check yourself for injuries, and you need to see around yourself. Anticipate shock. If the shaking lasted for more than 2 minutes, then you have to analyze it. Then you need to stay out of the damaged buildings. Then you need to listen to the radio and the wireless radios for the emergency information on the media and wait for the additional safety instruction. The next example is flood. In the pre-disaster phase, all your family members, if you are staying in a flood prone area, you should know the safe routes so that you can move out of the place or the nearest shelter, or also raised pakka house, because if you are staying in a basement or an underground place, then the flood the entire area and your houses. So, you need to stand on a raised area. And then you need to also consider building your houses with the resistant building materials. Of course, the media is important. You need to turn on your local radio or the TV for the warning advice. Emergency kits also need to be ready. During the disaster phase, of course, you need to stockpile all the essential things. You need to drink the boiled water, because during floods, the water can be contaminated. You need to keep your food covered. Then you need to take care of certain vectors, snakes, all these are very common during the floods, because vector-borne disease and other biological infestations are very common during floods. then you need to have certain warm clothing, because you can feel some people, especially the elderly and the young, they are vulnerable. So you need to have certain warm clothes. Then essential medication, valuable personal papers, these are important. Then of course you need to turn off the main electrical supply so that you don't have any short circuiting or other kind of things, and that could cause certain problems. The post disaster phase, naturally you should not get into the water of any unknown depth, and there may be certain currents phases going on. Then you should not allow the children to play in or near the flood waters. Then you need to let your family that you are safe if you are placed away from your family. Then only after the weather stations and your local authorities say that it is safe to come out, only then you should come out. Or if they say that you need to evacuate an area, when they use certain mic and other equipments, then you should always follow their advice. Cyclone, the next one. Now in the pre-disaster phase, here again you need to listen to the media and alert everyone through the local speakers by going home. And you need to identify the safe shelters in your area. These should be the cyclone resistant places and the closest route where you can reach people. You need to keep the emergency kit and the basic food supply, medicines, batteries, everything ready. Doors, windows, roofs and walls, they should be strengthened before the cyclone season, and all this occurs. And you need to renovate and repair your houses, and also keep sufficient food grains and stockpile things. Also mock drills are important for the family and the community. During disaster phase, same as in the case of floods, you do not venture into the sea. You need to stay indoors under the strongest part of the house and move to cyclone shelters. And unless it is officially known that you can go out, better not to go out. And if it needs to be evacuated, then again we need to listen to the advice. The post disaster phase, of course, like in the earlier hazards, the authorities will tell us when it is recommended to return to our homes, and we need to be careful about the broken electrical or the power lines, the damaged roads, the fallen trees and so on. Tsunami. So these are underwater generated earthquakes, and here again you need to know in the pre-disaster phase whether your home is situated in the danger zone. You need to know the height of your street, the house above the sea level, and also the distance from the coast, which is an important factor. Again, the evacuation plan maps, the home emergency kits form an important part. During the disaster, people living along the coast, they should consider if there are any earthquakes or certain kinds of warning signal, then they should move to the safer places. Then you need to stay away from the beach, and you can also climb on to raised platforms onto the highest floor of any house or building which you might see. So if you had seen this movie of San Andreas, which actually showed the hazards and how the people were faced with the earthquakes and the tsunamis, here you would have seen that the kids who were stuck in that case, they actually moved to a very high point upon a mountain hill, and they secured themselves and they were safe from the effects of these tsunami. Post disaster, again we need to listen to the media, the radio or the television. If you hear any official warning, then you need to evacuate immediately. You need to check for the short electrical, the short circuits, live wires, check the food supplies and also test the drinking water. Finally, the role of individuals. So socially responsible approach to building resilience would ensure that appropriate assistance is provided to particularly the vulnerable individuals, groups, regions and the communities. By contacting the local emergency management office or the local Red Cross office, the individuals can also find what types of disaster are more likely to occur in a specific community. Now some communities, they also use sirens and loudspeakers where they can inform each other by going door to door, or they can even leave certain messages. And now we also have all this media and the technological apps. We have the WhatsApp and other things where you can communicate with each other easily regarding the onset of any hazard. Then mock drills and other precautions also can be done, and this includes the roles of the individual. Technology. So a technological assistance is also very important, like for example the GIS. Okay, the geographical information systems, they provide a very effective tool for the remotely sensed data and other spatial and non-spatial data types. And here you can actually facilitate the measurement, mapping and monitoring of all the variety of the data types related to the natural phenomenon. So here you can prepare the hazard maps to delineate certain hazards like earthquakes, landslides. You can create them for the cities, for countries and also globally for the entire community. Finally, remote sensing and internet. These are also very important. Remote sensing means making any observation of an object from a distance without actually coming into contact with that thing. And this can gather data much faster than the ground based observation, and you can cover large area at one time to give a synoptic view. Internet, we all know, electronic communication is the most powerful platform for disaster mitigation and communication. So a website is a very low and cost effective means for the same. And here you can give a good option for the rapid, automatic and global dissemination of disaster information. So dear learners, in this module, we have understood the mitigation of natural hazards and disasters and how the role of individuals and technology, assisted technology can play a very important role in managing the hazards. We also saw the specific, with specific examples, we have seen the pre-disaster, during the disaster and post-disaster, what measures can be taken and how the community can be better prepared and how we can tackle such kind of hazards and disasters. Thank you.